So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Marvel, so let's start the series. It was uncommon for a ninja, especially a Kage, to live into retirement and die of old age surrounded by family and friends. Naruto was okay with it, but less so with what followed. He knew that there were billions of deaths out there, one for every being that was or would be. You avoided one and you found another. In the grand scheme of things, his was one of the good ones. He had killed in battle, witnessed men being put to death for the benefit of the village, and even carried out some of the execution himself. The essence of his life, as he had known it for an indeterminate amount of time since his death, was warmth, comfort, and darkness. If it weren't for the pain of Kurama's absence, which he had experienced for more than a century, Naruto might have given in to the peace of whatever it was. Alone in a body, the very core of his being, really, when he had never experienced the feeling before, it felt wrong despite the fact that everything else was right. For a while, he had attempted to brush his consciousness up against the reciprocating solidity of Kurama's, only to be met with nothing. It was like sitting down and having the seat pulled out from under you, except that there wasn't even the ground to catch you. It made him dizzy, even though there was no obvious direction in this black emptiness. Perhaps it was his soul that was dizzy. He could only keep track of time in the dark by being aware of his body. One moment he felt warm and comfortable, and the next he had a body. In his mind, this moment was the becoming, and he thought that sounded cool, since whatever cool was worth in this emptiness. As time passed unabatedly, he began to feel the darkness and discovered, much to his surprise, that it was not endless. Additionally, as his strength increased and he gained some degree of control over his movements, the space got smaller, and he began to mark time by the discomfort that grew until it eventually reached a quiet crescendo. The space, whatever it had been before, became hostile and seemed to contract and squeeze with much more urgency than the glacial pace at which it had been doing so before. Naruto thought it might kill him for one manic moment that seemed to go on forever. What cruel luck! He had already died once, and now it appeared he would die a second time without ever understanding the nature of this existence. He washed, swaddled, and lay on a soft surface before he could fully understand the world around him. He felt the light on his skin, and the air filled his lungs. He wailed for minutes before realizing he had been doing anything of the sort, but surely anything would be better than that violent, suffocating compression that had just occurred. As time passed, he became aware of someone picking him up, placing his mouth to what could only be a nipple, and his mouth filling with milk. He also realized the humiliation of having to empty his bladder and move his bowels without any control. People came and went, picked him up, put him down, cleaned him, and fed him without his consent. The world was suddenly full of space that the darkness had been lacking, and it was cold. The brightness stung his eyes even past the eyelids, he couldn't mustering the strength to open them. What else could this be but being a baby, seemed to be only an act of humiliation. Naruto loathed whatever improbable circumstance had brought him to experience this humiliation in full consciousness. She mumbled, "There you are, there's my baby girl." There was a serious problem. These events must have been triggered by a higher power or being, or a higher power of a higher being. Too many things happened at once, and then other things changed, as if at random. First and foremost, the fact that she was a girl raised the question, why engineer Uzumaki Naruto's rebirth only to have him reborn as a female? Although being born the opposite gender contradicted that theory, her name was too similar to the original as well, Naruko, just close enough, almost as though it was meant to be convenient for her. She was blonde, just like in her previous life, and, because she was born a mutant, she possessed power that felt uncannily similar to chakra. However, the applications of this power were significantly more limited. With the help of study and practice, she was able to extract some usefulness from her power, but it was not nearly as versatile as anything she had been able to do as Naruto Uzumaki. Passively enhanced strength, senses, and durability reminiscent of active chakra enhancements, but the power could only be externalized as generation and control over electricity. It was as if the power was made to both help and limit her. She also couldn't discount the fact that this life might, in fact, just be another turn of the samsara wheel, a karmic rebirth that held no greater meaning. The similarities could just be a good roll of the cosmic dice, all things being possible. It wasn't hard to believe that coincidences were more than capable of occurring in an infinite universe. Indeed, logic, as Naruto saw it, dictated that coincidences had to occur, and blind probability might account for all the seeming similarities to her past self. But the fact that she'd retained her memories imposed itself on this line of thinking like a wrench in the gears of some great machine. The samsara, as Naruto knew it, had no beginning, but her memories of her previous life clearly marked a beginning in a cycle that was without beginning and without end. She tried to ignore the nagging voice that said that everything ever written about the samsara was just a supposition by men who couldn't know the minute and detailed workings of the universe, no matter the vehemence with which they claimed to do so. This line of thought gave her a headache, and she eventually dismissed it as pointless navel-gazing that served only to confuse. Naruto saw that there wasn't much else to do and that she could only speculate as to why. So, she thought about it, flipped it over in her mind, came up with new theories, and concentrated on living out her second life. She spent time learning how to use her powers and transforming her body into the weapon it had been in her previous life, as well as spending time getting to know her new parents and this new world. She could have justified it by arguing that she was adjusting to a new environment and that it was a shinobi's responsibility to prepare for the unexpected. However, to put it another way, she was interested in her parents. Naruto Uzumaki had never really known his parents, and that had been okay, but she wanted to know about them and the world that had produced them. But as she grew older and interacted with people from different cultures through school and media, it became clear that this world had many languages, a ridiculous amount, really, and that she understood every single one. Without study or effort, she had been granted understanding of all the tongues of man. If that hadn't been done intentionally for her convenience, nothing could prove the theory that this existence had been designed. Her mother was Japanese, and her father was a blonde Icelander. She understood her parents' speech perfectly, attributing it to the language being identical to the language of her old world. Her mother, composer Aiko Sato, was small and delicate, dressed in irizumi from neck to ankle, which contrasted sharply with her warm blouses and light-colored cardigans. She worked primarily from home, with the rare exception of when she was required at a recording studio or performance. She was kind and considerate, but when she was working, she was a woman of singular focus. She was tall, while her mother was short. She was athletic and covered in the marks of years of daily training, while her mother was soft and not inclined to vigorous physical activity. She was a magician in the kitchen, and Naruto was able to handle instant ramen well, even though their powers were different. She inherited her eyes, red iridides and black sclera, and that seemed to be all. Thor Gjörderson appeared to be the part of the mythical god he was named after. Naruto was 185 centimeters tall, and her father dwarfed her by a head. He was muscular, had long hair, and wore his beard in a braid. Despite his appearance, he was gentle and made a modest living by raising a few sheep and cattle. She had inherited her innate ability to understand all languages from him, which must have been a mutant ability combined with his strength. He had never refuted the theory, but his raw strength was greater than Naruto's. She was able to lift a mid-sized sedan with ease, but had witnessed him lift a trailer truck to impress kids without even breaking a sweat. She still loved Naruto Uzumaki and his wife and kids, but their home, a red house on an Icelandic grassland that gave way to a rocky beach in the south and to forested hills and dramatic mountains in the north, was always full of love and music, and it was exactly the kind of idyllic family life she had always dreamed of as a young boy growing up in Konoha. Growing up happy, a storybook life on an idyllic farm with two loving parents, was more than she could have imagined in her previous life. She didn't mind not being Naruto Uzumaki, and she didn't mind being a woman, she just wished she didn't miss Kurama as much as she did. It had never felt right, that void his presence had left, it had felt wrong in the womb, and it felt wrong now, but Kurama had likely found happiness, whether he had regained his form or gone to some afterlife, he was probably better off, regardless of how much she missed him. She was ashamed to admit that she missed him more than she missed Hinata, Boruto, and Himawari, more than she missed her children's children, whom she had lavished with affection, and more than she missed all of Konoha. Now here she was, living the childhood of Naruto Uzumaki's dreams, and it was wrong because Kurama was gone and she hadn't known life without his constant presence for a century and a half. And it was this wrongness that focused her on her mission, what could only be a mission, even lacking any kind of intel on the objective. Her life was blessed, especially for a mutant. Iceland was a very forward-thinking and free country, they didn't subscribe to the discriminatory attitude towards mutants that most of the rest of the world did. She had rights where the lack of such had driven many mutants to band together under Magneto's terrorist Brotherhood of Mutants. She wasn't afraid of sudden attacks in a crowd every time she drove her father's truck to market or her mother played a concert. She didn't have to hide who she was. Fear that one day society might see fit to end her life, although they'd have a hell of a fight on their hands if it came to that. On the contrary, children begged for her to display her powers whenever her family was at the nearest town. They shouted delight when she pulled lightning from the sky into her waiting hands. They showered them in oohs and ahs when her father lifted a car over his head one-handed and her mother breathed circles of flame into the air, going as far as to shape the flame into dancing humanoid figures. A similar display in America was liable to get a mutant killed. No, other mutants fared much worse, and Naruto Thor's daughter couldn't help but believe that whatever her purpose was, it lay outside the borders of near-utopic Iceland. For the time being, though, she had no desire to leave, and she lived a happy life, training out of habit and appreciating the good fortune that whoever had created this new life had bestowed upon her. Life carried on in that manner until her father vanished. She recalled his parting words to her. He went into the forest one stormy morning on the eve of her 15th birthday and disappeared without a trace. I have to go settle some business, I may be gone a long while, but not even Ragnarok will keep me from you and your mother. She had not seen his head or tail in the past 2 years. On the morning of her 17th birthday, Naruto woke up well before the sun, as she usually did. Her room was dark, but she could see everything clearly with her eyes: bare walls, 2 windows with the curtains drawn, a stack of boxes she hadn't yet unpacked, and a Spartan dresser drawer with a mirror against the wall. She looked in the mirror and saw that she was the same as the day before, a typical teenage mutant ninja girl with full lips, fine features, wavy blonde hair, and intense red eyes. However, the yawning chasm left by Kurama's absence was still there. Her fingers worked swiftly and deftly, pulling her long hair into a loose plait, and she was out the door in a matter of minutes after slipping out from under the covers and into an orange hoodie, athletic leggings, and a sports bra. Regardless of the city they lived in, she ran the city before the sun came up. The direction didn't matter, but today she ran west, toward Manhattan, and away from the nearest thing to a suburb in New York City. She ran along the streets of Queens Forest Hills neighborhood. With only the sounds of a city that never sleeps and her own footsteps as company, she used this time as a form of meditation. She ran through yards, hopped fences, and, when needed, she hopped entire houses. When the houses and tree cover gave way to multi-story buildings and dark streets lit by sickly orange street lamps, she ran across rooftops. There was no need to think or wonder, no guessing at meanings or implications regarding the events surrounding her life. The only thing was the running itself, and the only objective was the next step. She heard threats when she concentrated her hearing after hearing a high, feminine scream that was quickly cut short by profanity and the sounds of a fight atop a 5-story structure. "Shut the fuck up, bitch." It was a typical scene. Big cities produced a lot of petty criminals. In the early hours of the morning, 2 men, one with a knife and the other with a pistol, mugged a woman who was cowering against the wall. The gunman kept his pistol trained on the woman while the other attempted to rifle through her purse while simultaneously holding onto his knife. It was awkward work, and Naruto might have laughed at his efforts if it weren't for his partner's mounting frustration. The gunman said, "Hurry up, man." His partner, whose nerves were already running high, fumbled the purse and spilled its contents on the concrete. This caused her to curse again and laugh before she quashed it and stepped off the building's edge. She landed in a crouch and, somewhere in the back of her mind, chastised herself for the thud. She was heavy, much heavier than a normal human, even though she weighed close to 205 kilograms. The sound aroused the gunman, but before he could blink, she grabbed the weapon from his grasp and hurled it over her shoulder, further down the alley, where it clattered somewhere in the dark. "Who the?" She interrupted him with a grin that she doubted they could see beyond the street lamps. "You should just go, boys, I really don't want to have to hit you," she said. The disarmed man turned to his partner with a look of disbelief. "These wannabe heroes are crawling out of the woodwork," he said, looking her up and down as he backed away. "Pretty one, too, won't be for long," he said, pushing his partner's shoulder a little. "Will you cut this bitch already?" he asked. The knife led the way as he came slowly. She assessed him. He was tall and weedy, with light complexion, mousy brown hair, and a stubbled jaw. The knife shook even though he held it tightly, and she let out an impatient groan. Naruto pointed to the woman, who was watching the situation with rapt attention despite her fear, and squeaked when the focus was returned to her. "Come on, man, are you serious with this?" "You're shaking more than her," Naruto said, gesturing to the woman. The man's eyes were wide and dilated, his mind trapped in a heady mixture of fear and adrenaline. Naruto snapped her fingers twice. She said to herself, "No, no, keep your eyes over here," and he turned back to face her. The knife was trembling a little less, and she could tell by the expression on his face that he had made up his mind, but Naruto gave him one final chance, saying, "You've got a choice here, drop the knife, go home." "Cut her," the unarmed shooter yelled. "It was that or electrocution. Or you can take that asshole's advice and I'll have to hit you. You never knew who you might kill when you threw lightning at them," the gunman said again, and his partner's back appeared to straighten a little, his shoulders were set, the knife stopped its shaking, and he took a step forward. "It's just some chick, you got like 50 pounds on her, just do it and let's go." With a smile on her face, she said, "Okay, but a piece of advice, come at me right here," pointing to the middle of her ample bust. "Once you're committed, well, you might as well go for broke, right?" The man took 4 long strides across the space between them, the knife leading, aiming for the heart. Before he knew it, Naruto stepped to the right and struck him across the face with an open palm. The man collapsed to the ground, and the knife clattered away, joining the gun in the darkness. After a brief period of quiet during which the man collapsed bonelessly to the ground, the gunman appeared to comprehend that his buddy was already unconscious. Then, in his rush to turn around and pound his way out of the situation, he stumbled over his own feet. Shit. Fuck. I'm sorry. Oh, God. A fucking super, just my luck, the shooter said as he ran away into the night, his friend long since forgotten. Naruto turned to face the woman who was staring at the knife wielder's lifeless body in shock and asked, "You okay?" Her eyes swept over the woman, up and down, searching for any wounds. She was in perfect condition, with not even a rip in her blue scrubs. Naruto would estimate her age to be in her middle years, with a hint of gray in her brown hair and crow's feet at the corners of her brown eyes. She was attractive, with laugh lines separating her mouth. Perhaps she was a nurse traveling to or from work before being waylaid. I told them I didn't want to hit them, the woman said, turning to face her as a smile spread across her face. Naruto then hurried over and gave her a tight hug. After a minute, the lady released her grip and, apparently in a fit of rage, kicked the unconscious man in the ribs. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she repeated like a mantra, while Naruto simply gave her a comforting pat on the back. "Whoa. Hey, stop," Naruto put a hand on her shoulder and pulled her back. "I'm pretty sure I did enough damage for both of us," she said, laughing, but it was also true. Naruto turned the would-be robber over and looked at his face, which was covered in blood and saliva from where he had been lying on it. Upon closer inspection, she saw that there was a laceration above his cheekbone and along his orbital socket, as well as a nasty bruise from where she had slapped him. 3 teeth were visible in the pool of blood and saliva on the floor. She wasn't sure if the laceration was caused by her hand or the floor when he fell, but she could safely claim the teeth. Jesus, like tissue paper, this guy, Naruto sucked air between her teeth. She had chosen not to punch him, but even a slap would have been too much for a normal person. The victim's phone's flashlight blinked over her shoulder, and the woman gasped, making a sound that was halfway between shock and sympathy. Naruto stood up and attempted to guide the woman away, saying, "It's best if we just call him an ambulance." The second gasp from the woman interrupted her. She had seen Naruto's eyes, which she typically wore sunglasses to protect them since they had left Iceland, but were bare because she had been dashing across roofs in the dark and didn't think she would need them. "Are you a mutant?" she asked. When it came to the topic of mutants in America, Naruto didn't see any of the usual fear in her eyes. Charles Xavier and his X-Men had done a lot to improve the public's perception of mutants, and after saving some powerful person, they had even succeeded in passing a law that made it illegal for the government to discriminate against them. However, the general public was still unpredictable, and regardless of how much Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, Captain America, and countless others tried to present a positive image of superpowers, Magneto's terrorist group made it simple for the general public to single out mutants as a "other" to be feared. Naruto responded with a weary sigh, "Yeah, that I am," and she was about to take her shades out of her hoodie pocket when the woman's touch on her wrist stopped her. "Oh, stop all that," she said with a kind smile, "because a good person doesn't need shame." "Not shame, really, just expediency, I guess," Naruto said, scratching the back of her head, a habit she had not been able to escape even in a new life. "Well, I'm May Parker, and there's no need for any of that with me, you're a hero in my book." "Well, May Parker, we should really call this guy an ambulance, and the police." She looked back at the man and said, "Oh, an ambulance, absolutely, but the police? Surely that's punishment enough, she said. Naruto grinned and squeezed Mei's shoulder, acknowledging that she was a kind person. If you say so. After that, they had parted ways, but later that day, Naruto ran into Mei Parker again. It turned out that they were next-door neighbors, and she had come to the door to deliver a plate of cookies as a housewarming gift for her new neighbors. Mei's face lit up with joy when Naruto answered the door, and she had then met Naruto's mother. The two lovely women, who were about the same age, got along like a house on fire. Naturally, they had started talking about their kids, Mei's nephew, in particular, and the topic of her own birthday had come up. Naruto was happy not to celebrate because birthday parties had lost their appeal after more than a century of birthdays. Despite her youthful appearance, her mother always made sure to at least put a candle in a cupcake and give her a cheek kiss on the big day. Now, Mei Parker, noticing the lack of celebration, had insisted that Naruto visit her home and meet her nephew. Because she was so adorable, Naruto didn't object when she was led through the doorway, up the stairs, and into a teenage boy's room. She was a pretty girl, and teenage boys frequently tried to project an air of cool when she was around. It was usually hilarious, but Peter was staring at his aunt instead of her. The room was messy, with posters on the walls, an unmade bed in the corner, a desk under a window, and a 17-year-old boy sitting in a desk chair, looking surprised and as though he was trying to project an air of nonchalance. Mei bemoaned, "Oh, Peter, I wish you'd clean this room," as she hurried around and began gathering clothes that had been scattered all over the floor. Peter watched her from his seat, and Naruto watched him. His jaw twitched, and his eyes flickered from Mei to the ceiling. Curious, she looked up, and saw a bundle of red and blue spandex stuck to the ceiling by what appeared to be white strands. Webs. Although there were many costumed vigilantes in New York City, she never imagined that she would simply stumble into someone's bedroom. She turned back to Peter, who was now staring at her with undisguised fear. She couldn't help but giggle and squirmed. Peter yelled out, "Aunt Mei, please." Mei straightened up, a heap of clothes in her arms, but she wasn't sure if he was being completely sincere or just acting like the embarrassed adolescent. Okay, I'll stop embarrassing you," she said as she walked out of the room. "This is Naruto, by the way, I told you about her, be nice," she said. Peter nearly pushed her out, locking the door behind her and then leaning against it. Naruto then settled into his empty chair, grinning and shifting her eyes between him and the costume hanging on the ceiling. "Sue," she trailed off, pointing to the bundle of webbing and material. That's really not what it looks like. So you're for sure not Spider-Man, you don't swing around the city in tights and fight crime, none of it?" Nope, just your average mild-mannered teenage boy, big-time Spidey fan, but not, Spidery in the least." "Sure, okay," she said, turning the chair to face the desk, which had a laptop and other pieces of technology that were in various stages of disassembly and reassembling. She took up what appeared to be a bracelet and began tinkering with it. "Please don't." A piece of webbing connected itself to the wall with a thwip after shooting out of a nozzle on the bracelet. With a smug look, she returned the web shooter to the desk and asked, "So, what's up, not Spider-Man?" "Kill me now," Peter moaned pathetically, his head in his hands, giving the impression that his entire world was collapsing. She laughed and watched him regain his composure. Although he was an inch or two shorter than her, he was strong, and she could see the vascularity in his forearms. He was also wiry, and like her, he was incredibly well developed for a teenager his age. She removed her dark mirrored sunglasses with circular frames and said, "From what I've heard, you save people. If you want to keep it a secret, that's fine with me, although, you might consider a better system," pointing again to the costume hanging on the ceiling. "Would you stop?" "I'm not going to tell anyone," she said, looking up at her incredulously. He sighed and regained his composure. "Right, yeah, she surprised me. I was about to go out and," he said, looking around slyly and lowering his voice, "patrol, thus the, hasty job," he shrugged, and she saw another web shooter on his wrist. He was staring into her eyes and said, "Mutant, right? May, told me, you saved her life this morning. I can't thank you enough, don't know what I'd do without her, I keep telling her to Uber home," he said. Naruto couldn't help but smile as she let him run off at the mouth for a time before interrupting him, since he was babbling and spouting words at a mile a minute, as if he could explode if he didn't get them out. "Look, Peter, I don't need any thanks, besides, your aunt did enough of that this morning for both of you, and it's not like I was going to let her get mugged, I could help so I did, all there is to it," she said while leaning back in her chair. He muttered, "Great power, great responsibility," but she could still hear it. "Yep, that about sums it up," she said, and his head jerked up in astonishment. "We're super people, Peter," she said, laughing once again. "True," he said as he walked away and collapsed on the mattress. "What are your powers anyway?" "It's probably more than trippy eyes, right? Not that those aren't cool, gotta be super strength, right? May says you slapped 3 teeth out of that mugger's mouth, little excessive, you ask me, but he was mugging my aunt," she observed him as he rambled. "He was kind, even to a scumbag thief who was missing a few teeth, like his aunt." If the volume of his speech and the disassembled technology were any guide, he was either a genius or hyperactive. He was a good boy. "I didn't mean to hurt him badly," she interrupted him once more, making it seem like a normal part of talking to Peter Parker, especially when he was nervous. "I try not to hit normal people, they're fragile, even if I hold back, so yeah, super strength," she said, ticking off her fingers as she listed them, "pretty good senses, durability, stamina, all the mundane stuff, there's also this," she said, wriggling her fingers as red electricity arced between them, creating a crackling sound. "And I can speak every language," she exclaimed. "That's a lot, even for a mutant, especially for a mutant, you know, I read a few of Dr. Xavier's papers, and it's pretty rare for a mutant to be born with multiple powers, and usually they're activated by stressors in their environment. I mean, there are a lot of variables, and you said every language, did you learn them, or just know them? Your accent sounds Scandinavian, so say something to me in, nothing Germanic, Mandarin." He looked at her expectantly, clearly a genius at the time, and probably very hyperactive as well. "You're a strange kid," she said in the requested language. "Now, let's go," she concluded normally. Naruto stood up from her chair, and the chair moaned in relief as she did so. She concentrated for a moment, trying to find the feel for specifically Mandarin. Usually when she spoke, people heard their native tongue, but all languages had a certain feel, like a timbre or a taste, and she could speak in those languages specifically if she tried. With unnatural skill, he jumped up and out of bed and inquired, "Where are we going?" "You said you were gonna go on dash," her fingers created air quotes, "patrol, so let's go. Your aunt brought me here for my birthday, and for my birthday I'd like to see Spider-Man in action, get your pajamas." "Oh," he said, his eyes wide with astonishment, before settling into a kind grin. "Happy birthday. You're going dressed like that?" he questioned, looking down at her as he jumped and flipped, landing on all fours on the ceiling. She noticed his elegant execution, making it seem as effortless as strolling down the street. She felt a twinge of jealousy since she missed walking on walls. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" she asked, thinking she looked good and cute. She was wearing a band tee underneath an orange flannel that was unbuttoned, trousers that had a rip in the right knee, and a white pair of slip-ons with little orange toads printed all over them. "Well, you know, to keep your identity a secret," she asked as he pulled out his mask and put it on. It was red with a black web pattern across it, and it had big, white lenses in a black frame that appeared to work like a camera aperture, widening and narrowing in accordance with what she assumed to be his own eyes beneath the mask. In response, she shrugged and put her shades back on. "Tada! Identity concealed," she said. "Haha, very funny," he said. "Now leave, will ya? I gotta get changed." When he came out, he was wearing the same jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt that she had just seen him wearing, along with a backpack slung over his shoulder. She raised an eyebrow, and he pulled down the neck of his shirt to reveal red spandex with a web pattern. All right," she said, leaving his room and waiting against the wall across from the door. He led the way downstairs, where the wall was covered in framed photos of the Parker family over the years. She glanced at one that was recent, with a small 2019 written in the corner, nearly out of frame. It was Peter from a year ago, a few inches shorter, much scrawnier, and wearing thick glasses. A middle-aged man was with him, his hand on his shoulder, and he was grinning at the camera. She glanced from the young, scrawny Peter to the one coming down the stairs, who was taller, muscular, and as graceful as a cat. It was obvious that he had acquired these abilities in the past year or so she filed that information away as interesting. "May, we're going out. Be back later," he yelled to his aunt, who was having tea with Naruto's mother in the dining room, as they arrived at the door. When she said, "Don't stay out too late, Peter, school starts tomorrow," as her mother said, "The same goes for you, Naruto." They rode the subway into Manhattan, and although she kept telling him that no one would recognize her anywhere, she and her mother had only been in New York for a week, and that the Parkers were the only people Naruto knew, Peter was cautious about his identity because he was concerned about his aunt's safety and wouldn't risk it. At least she could understand that. A hot dog stand was the first stop, a necessity, according to Peter, and they then set up shop atop a building. Peter was dressed in costume, he had packed the rest of his clothes in his backpack, but he was not wearing a mask. It was a beautiful afternoon in early September, sunny and mild. As she chewed into her hot dog, she questioned, "I thought Spider-Man's modus operandi was swinging around the city, looking for crime. You know a lot about Spider-Man. Are you my biggest fan?" he joked. "I've seen some videos, read a few articles, so." Peter swallowed the rest of his dog and shrugged as he took a camera out of his backpack. Naruto had no idea what a camera was, but this one looked like something a pro may have. "Usually yeah, I swing around, but I'm pretty low on web fluid, hoping to get some good shots today, sell ham to the bugle, re-up on supplies, do little home chemistry, bada bing, bada boom, more webs." Nobody ever tells you how expensive this whole vigilante business is, but what are you gonna do? Exactly, what are we gonna do? I'm all for loitering on rooftops, but it's not much of a patrol. The inner workings were revealed when Peter picked up his mask and flipped it inside out. The lenses were connected to a small wire that connected an earphone to some sort of electronics that she couldn't understand. "This," he gestured toward the electronics, "connects to my phone," and he took the phone out of a zippered pocket that was otherwise very obscure. And my phone runs an app of my own design that taps into the police's radio frequencies, he said. And here I am thinking you're just an idealistic kid, you're like a genius, huh? Naruto said, whistling softly, astonished by the situation. First of all, kid, we're the same age. And B, if you weren't just like me, you wouldn't have saved May this morning, he said, shrugging and pulling the mask over his head. Fair enough, she said, tossing the last portion of her hot dog bun to 3 pigeons who were lingering. They immediately tore it to pieces. So, any activity on the radio? She asked. He only said, robbery down the street, before leaping from the building. Well, all right, then, Naruto muttered to no one. She grabbed Peter's camera and backpack, which he had left behind in an attempt to make a stylish getaway, and proceeded to the next building, leaping to track his journey from above. She didn't know if Peter was more skilled or weaker than her, but she couldn't seem to punch a regular person without breaking at least a bone. He dodged around more gracefully than a ballerina, knowing where the danger was at all times, keeping civilians out of harm's way. Spider-Man stopped a few muggings, maybe the odd bodega hold-up, and Naruto watched and took pictures. Peter seemed to have narrowed down beating average thugs to a science, knowing just the amount of force needed to put them down without drawing blood. It appeared to be a rather low-stakes afternoon, but as they were packing things and about to go to bed, something more interesting occurred. And so it continued, past sunset and into the night. Naruto was giving Peter his belongings as they stood on a rooftop in East Harlem. The sun was setting, sitting on the horizon and illuminating the city with an orange twilight. As he took his possessions, he remarked, I wonder if this is what it's like to have a butler. Do I have to pay you if this becomes a regular thing? She gave him a shoulder shove, and he staggered back a few paces. I'll throw you off this roof, I swear I'll do it, she said. The conversation abruptly ended when Peter put his fingers to his ear over the mask. Eddie Brock just broke out of Rikers, he remarked with what Naruto felt was excessive gravity. Don't threaten me with a good TI, Naruto deadpanned, I don't know who or what that is. Peter was tapping at the screen of his phone when he turned it up to show her a surprisingly clear image of a man. She wouldn't call it that, really, but it was big, covered in something that looked like a mixture of flesh and goo, and rippling with muscle. A big white spider stretched across its chest, its maw open, as if roaring at the person who took the picture, and its teeth were long and jagged, its tongue long and thick, and it was dripping green saliva. He placed his phone away, as if listening to the radio in his ear for additional details. This is Eddie Brock, Venom, and Rikers is a prison, he said. They say he jumped into the river minutes ago, heading west. How'd he get the symbiote back? Not good, he said. So, which direction are we going? Naruto questioned, and to her surprise, she could hear enthusiasm in her own voice. She wanted to find this creature, but she wasn't sure whether it was just her inner warrior spirit waking up at the thought of a good fight. Naruto wasn't having it. He muttered to himself, Venom's really dangerous, nearly sounding afraid but reluctant. I barely beat him last time, I don't have any sonics, either, he said. She clenched her hands into fists and smashed them together, causing a surge of lightning that briefly arced between her fists' knuckles before she pulled them apart. Oh, don't blush now, besides you've got me with you, she said. Yeah, okay, electricity's good, he said, sounding more assured now. He hurried to the building's edge, fastening his bag to the roof as he went. It's a symbiote, kind of like a living suit, that's where he gets his power. Get that away from him and Eddie's just a man, it's strong and versatile, but it's got two weaknesses: sonics, no luck on that, and heat, electricity's pretty hot, so bring the heat and bring it hard, we'll run east across the rooftops, I wanna save the webbing. He's not exactly subtle, so we'll run into him sooner or later, let's just hope he doesn't decide to lay low in the sewers, he said. Venom was sprinting across the soccer field at Thomas Jefferson Park when they saw him. Naruto was correct, he was large, at least 7 feet tall, if not taller, and when it saw Spider-Man, its mouth opened into a menacing smile. "Oh, Peter, you were too quick to find us, we miss you, too, but we wanted our reunion to be special," he said. Although his voice was deep, Naruto thought he was silly because, instead of coming across as intimidating, the way he said Peter's name and his voice dripping with genuine longing gave the impression that he was looking directly at her. "This your girlfriend, Peter? You won't mind if we play with her, will you?" Venom's tongue slithered out of his mouth and licked his own head and eye, or the white patch of flesh that appeared to be its eye. He was a creep, but that didn't matter because she was drawn to him and compelled. She hadn't felt such a calling for violence since before she retired from her position as Hokage, but something inside of her needed this fight. A smile appeared on her face, and she passed Peter. Whatever this calling was, she wouldn't deny it. He screamed, high and horrifying, and was flung back a few feet and landed on his back. Naruto could see the black flesh, the symbiote, writhe and wriggle as the patch on its chest that had been struck steamed. She didn't allow a reprieve, violence was calling her, the fight awaited. "Oh, she wants to play with us, Peter," it said, almost purring his name. "Don't worry, we'll take good care of." The symbiote boiled and steamed from where the electricity that writhed over her fist had imparted its heat, and a thunderclap accompanied the blow. Venom, as if sensing the impending danger, was on his feet quickly but was only struck in the face by an electrically charged fist for his trouble. Venom attempted to retreat, but Naruto kept up with her every stride. She used a charged foot to strike his knee, causing the symbiote to boil there. She then delivered a double punch to the chest, causing the substance to melt. Above, storm clouds formed, thundering with dread and flashing red with her own brand of lightning. Every thunderclap matched a blow she delivered on symbiote, and Peter stared in amazement as she brought the awe and shock. Venom withdrew in the face of a ferocious and completely unanticipated attack, and the symbiote sloughed off Eddie Brock and fell into inactive black pools that marked their passage across the field. He made an unsuccessful attempt to block, but even if she hadn't been as fast as the lightning she swung around so effortlessly, his defense would have crumbled under her attack. In a matter of seconds, all that was left was Eddie Brock, completely nude and alone, with the symbiote having retreated inside his body. He was tall and muscular, but, as Peter had stated, just a man without his suit. Suddenly, the call was gone, and this wasn't a worthy opponent, just a man reduced to begging. "Please, you're killing it, please, just stop, you win, just don't kill it, please," Eddie said as he bowed before her. Naruto sighed and put her hands down by her sides. The storm clouds passed as quickly as they had appeared, and she didn't want anything to do with it. Whatever violent rage had gripped her was completely gone now. She turned to face Peter, who was still standing in the same spot, stunned by what had just transpired. He got up and ran over. His first words were, I was expecting way more trouble than that if I'm being honest," as he began to pick Eddie up. "Maybe I should carry your things from now on, geez," he muttered. Naruto noticed movement in the corner of her eye and focused her attention on one of the inactive puddles of likely dead symbiote matter. She approached and took a close look at it. Her hand lit up with electricity again, and the symbiote retreated. It collected itself into a small black ball, about the size of a tennis ball, and on its surface appeared something that made Naruto gasp. It was inky black and didn't seem to reflect light. She felt the urge to poke it, and she was about an inch away from doing so when the puddle came to life, roiling with a mind of its own. 9 red magatama all lined up perfectly at the ball's equator. The same sensation that had prompted her to give Venom a vicious pounding now demanded that she reach out and accept this item, so she did. She didn't let herself hope, wouldn't dare, but she felt forced to do so. Something inside her that had been empty for 17 years and 9 months was now full, and it felt better than anything she had experienced in years. She smiled when she heard the voice. Her hand closed around it, and it slithered up her sleeve and out of sight. "Hey, partner." Her mother was still up and drinking tea while watching the evening news when Naruto arrived home, so she went over and sat on the couch next her. "What did you two do?" she inquired, casting a suspicious glance at her daughter. "You know, if anything, it's not me you should be worrying about," Naruto said, laughing at her expression. "We went into the city, had a hot dog, normal stuff," she said. Aiko put her tea on the coffee table and gave a pretty unladylike snort. "No, I suppose you're right, but a mother can't help but worry. Come here," she said, reaching out and taking Naruto's head on her lap. Kurama's voice echoed in her head, "Mama's girl," and Naruto could only grin and take pleasure in it. She thought back, "Yeah, guess I am," as her mother's tattooed fingers untied her long braid. The sensation of her fingers running through her hair made Naruto shiver. Naruto traced her own fingers over the koi tattoo that showed over her left knee and peeked out from under her mom's skirt. They sat there for a few minutes, watching the news in silence, and when her mom spoke, Naruto was half asleep. "Is that you, Naruto?" "Was it?" She was startled out of her slumber by the film on the TV, which showed a lady hurling red lightning in a park and brutally thrashing a beast that was much bigger than herself. "Could be anyone," Naruto said, turning to smile into her mother's thigh. Her mother gave a short tug on one of Naruto's hairs in response. She spoke firmly, "Naruto," and Naruto turned to face her. Aiko was worried about her lip, and her brow was furrowed. "Yeah, that's me," Naruto conceded, "I couldn't help myself." That was true enough. The call, whatever it had been, was strong. "I'm not the type to sit idly by, neither are you," and that "neither was Dad" remained unsaid. Aiko Sato had been a bit of a vigilante when she was younger in Japan. She had been a wild child, as evidenced by the tattoos all over her body, and frequently stuck her nose into dangerous situations. She had broken the habit during her time in college, but ultimately, she was a good soul. Naruto couldn't read her expression, and she watched her mother's face as her mother watched hers, and when her mother smiled softly, she leaned down to kiss her forehead. The staring match ended. "Be careful, and keep your grades up, and, if you really must do this, wear a mask, please." "Oh. I expected you to read me the riot act, at least." She gave Naruto her most severe expression, but underneath it was humor, Naruto knew. "You've always been headstrong. If I forbid you, you'll do it anyway. The cost of raising an unruly child," my mother would say. "She knew something of unruly daughters. If it affects your grades, however, that's the end of it," she said. "Okay," Naruto said, taking her mother's hand and kissing her palm. "On that note, go to bed. School tomorrow," Aiko said, pushing Naruto to get up and start putting away her teapot and teacup after her legs were free. Naruto mumbled, yeah, but despite the put-upon tone of her voice, the corners of her mouth perked up. Your hair is too long, Kurama said as soon as she entered her room. It was wavy and, if Naruto was being honest, too long. It required an absurd amount of maintenance, got in her eyes, and was scorching in the summer. At its longest, it stretched past her butt and to the tops of her thighs. It reminds me of Kushina, she said quietly out loud. She didn't want to forget her first parents, even though she didn't get to know them as well as she did the new ones. She also didn't want to let any of them go, even if her new father had left, been killed, or something. Speaking from a red fox head at the end of a black tendril that protruded from beneath her clothes, he said, "Fair enough," this time from directly next to her head. "Let me show you something, get naked," he said. "Pervert," she said, but she nevertheless followed his instructions. "Well?" she inquired while fully nude. She started to notice the black substance, which was between solid and liquid and was clearly symbiote, spreading over her skin. Sitting in his office at the Triskelion, surrounded by screens that looped back footage of a superpowered altercation that had occurred the previous evening in Thomas Jefferson Park, director Nick Fury was, to put it mildly, intrigued. Each screen displayed a different angle, all taken from a different source, mostly choppy and low-quality cell phone footage. He watched as escaped convict Eddie Brock was brutally captured by a woman whose identity had been confirmed as Naruto Thor's daughter. It had been easy to identify her because her mother had obtained their EB-3 visas through her employer, a fairly powerful music label. That was pretty typical, but all mutants who applied for any type of permanent residency status had to disclose their status and abilities. These declarations were submitted to the federal government. Some mutants attempted to cheat the system, believing that if they looked normal on the outside, no one would notice. Many were successful, but Thor's daughter and her mother had not made any such attempt. He looked at their photos in their files from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and those eyes were unmasked. She was discovered through a routine cross-reference between the Department of Homeland Security database of registered mutants and the electrical and weather anomalies displayed during the battle. Investigating superpowered incidents at S.H.I.E.L.D. was well within the purview of their daily operations. She had underreported the extent of her power, making a sworn statement that it was small-scale, like a taser, but now there was video evidence that it was much more. It was a crime that he could use as leverage, to be sure, but Fury thought the soft cell made a better first impression. Fury grinned as his eye scanned her file and came across a still image of her hand covered in electricity. His actions included taking her USCIS file and placing it in a bin marked Initiative A-1. The following morning, when it was still sunny, Naruto saw Peter outside her door. "Aunt May said I should walk you to school, so," he said, bouncing one fist on top of the other in what she recognized as a nervous gesture. It was like being a Kage in front of nervous genin, and Naruto Uzumaki had enjoyed himself at the expense of numerous genin teams over the years. She got her entertainment value where she could, and teenage boys were ripe for the picking. He sighed in relief as she released him from the hook. "Okay," she said. Kurama added, "He likes you," referring to whatever psychological bond symbiotes had with their hosts. "He's shit out of luck if he does," she said, adding enjoyment to making boys anxious, but she was afraid to pursue a romantic relationship with one. She was mature enough to acknowledge that, despite her gender and sexual orientation in a past life, she was attracted to some boys, but the real problem was age. She was, quite frankly, old as hell, and boys her own age were simply too young. She found it difficult to take them seriously, let alone think of them as romantic partners. The same was true for girls. She was attracted, but the mental age gap was uncomfortable. Peter rushed to catch up with her as she left the house and passed him on her way to her new school, and they gradually slowed down. Peter said, "Cool shoes," searching for a conversation starter. Kurama, in his role as a symbiote and eager to demonstrate his abilities, had changed into clothes for her to wear because he preferred a darker style, and Naruto was unwilling to give him instructions on such a trivial matter. Her shoes were identical to those from the previous day, save for the fact that they were black and covered in tiny orange fox faces. "Yep," she said, instantly shifting the conversation to something less commonplace. "Say, tell me about that symbiote from yesterday. It seemed like you three had some history," she said. She took advantage of his lack of attention to have Kurama produce a pair of sunglasses in her hand and put them on her face. Peter's eyebrows shot up, and he then jerked his head around in an attempt to catch any stray listeners. Other than a few children who were dispersed and walking in the same direction as them, no one of interest was around. As she showed, "No one's listening, and stop being so suspicious. A good spy makes a sweep look casual," she said. "Don't give yourself whiplash, just look around like you're taking in the scenery." "So?" she said, lowering her voice slightly and whispering softly, "The symbiote?" Yeah, I guess it starts with the Fantastic Four." "No, Eddie came first." "Okay, so when I first took up the webs everyone thought it was great, I mean, not the police, or the mayor, or the criminals, but everyone else loved it I guess, except Jonah Jameson. That's the editor-in-chief at the Bugle. They run hit pieces on Spider-Man, and I guess Jameson considers it a slow day if he doesn't have something negative to say about me. That's why they buy so many pics. Yeah, anyway, Eddie was a reporter for the Bugle. Long story short, he tried to unmask me, ended up unmasking a copycat, just some guy from Brooklyn. Thought it might be fun to do a little vigilante work, was a pretty skilled martial artist, too. Anyway, it turns out that criminals aren't very big fans of my work, and I was doing a lot to disrupt the Kingpin's operations at the time. He's a big-time organized crime. This is the short version. Yeah, okay, well, the Kingpin's guys came to this copycat's place and murdered him, and once that came out, Jameson left Brock out in the cold. His career was over in an instant, and I guess he blamed me for that," he said, taking a breath before going on. "Right, so, like 6 months ago I went into space with the Fantastic Four. And it was awesome. I mean, Reed Richards is such a genius, man. I could have listened to him talk about astrophysics for hours. Neil deGrasse Tyson, eat your heart out," he said, clearing his throat in response to Naruto's raised eyebrow. "So, yeah, we went into space, something about Dr. Doom trying to mine some alien material on an asteroid to create a new weapon, but it turned out to be a giant ruse. But on that asteroid I found the symbiote. At first it was fine, just turned itself into a cool new suit, made me stronger, provided organic webbing, and then I was exhausted all the time. I was having mood swings, getting more violent. Richard said it was the suit. Turns out it was taking my body out for nighttime joyrides, manipulating my body chemistry, making me more likely to get into fights. It was feeding on my emotions and creating a more perfect host while doing so. So, I got rid of it. It must have found Eddie soon after. They both hated me. It was a match made in heaven, or hell, I guess." "Did it ever speak to you, then?" "No, never talked to me. Must have talked to Eddie though. Blew my secret identity and all." "Hasn't Brock visited your residence before?" "Thankfully, no, and he's never revealed my identity to anyone else as far as I know. They want me all to themselves, I think. It's super weird and very creepy," he said with a forced grin. "Well, lucky I'm here to protect your chastity," Naruto said, throwing an arm over Peter's shoulders. In any case, school was boring. Naruto kept up perfect grades for her mother. It turned out that parents actually cared about that kind of thing, but she wasn't interested in school beyond that. While some kids had shown a lot of interest in the new student, teenagers had short attention spans, and the air of mystery her sunglasses gave her was soon explained away as a medical necessity, and she was soon just a typical new girl. She answered questions about Iceland, how she was adjusting to life in America, and other topics, but her day really started after school. Peter was dressed and prepared to go, but she had one last thing to discuss with him first. She always believed it was best to just tear off the bandage. She was on a rooftop in Jackson Heights with Peter, and they spent a lot of time on rooftops. Peter turned to see that she was wearing the suit that Kurama had given her, which was mostly black. The mask covered her hairline, and her hair framed her face, with the extra hair pulled into a long braid that reached the small of her back, as was her usual style. The eyes were two red patches that resembled Spider-Man's own lenses, and the 9 red magatama traced her collarbone, trailed over her shoulders, and finished the circle just below the back of her neck. The suit's fingers were also red and pointed at the tips, giving the appearance of fingerless gloves. Naruto thought the entire outfit was rather slick, if a little edgy. Peter apparently was so shocked by the tail end of the change that he backflipped across the rooftop and landed in a crouch on the ledge, firing a wad of webbing at her. The entire thing was instantly covered when Naruto caught the wad in her left hand. The mask pulled back from her face as she turned to face Peter, her expression full of annoyance. She applied electricity to the hand, melting the webbing. "Isn't he an excitable monkey? Would you not? Would you please?" She flicked the last remnants of the melted webbing off with her hand as she spun it back and forth. "That's what you're wearing. What did I tell you? You are aware of what it attempted to do to Eddie and me. This is a different symbiote, I trust him," she said nonchalantly as she walked slowly toward him, her hands by her sides in the most unthreatening position she could manage. "Take the drama down like 10 notches there, Pete," she said. "Yeah, say hi, Kurama," she said, as a black tendril emerged from her suit at the shoulder and eventually resembled a fox's head. Kurama greeted him as "monkey," and the fox head nodded before slipping back inside the costume. "What the devil?" inquired Peter in a startled murmur. She touched her heart with her index finger and said, "He was born yesterday, when I was beating the tar out of Venom. He was spawned, I guess. Kurama's good people, promise. It's not a human. Furthermore, how are you even aware of that, now?" He was pacing the ledge in an attempt to accept it. She was unable to tell him the truth, saying that she and Kurama had been together for well over a century in a previous life. "Just a hunch, just like I know you're a good person," she said. "Not all symbiotes are the same, Peter, you're being kind of racist right now, if I'm being honest," she joked to defuse the situation. Peter then stepped off the ledge and crossed his arms in a defiant manner. She approached, removed his mask from his head, and placed her hands on his shoulders, making Naruto realize how young he truly was. He couldn't help but look into her eyes. "You mean we're pals, Peter?" "Yeah, friends trust each other. Trust me when I tell you Kurama isn't like the other symbiote and I'm not like Venom, it'll be fine. It's just I don't think you know just how." "Hey, Peter," she interrupted him, saying, "I'm an adult, and only I and my mother know what's best for me. But basically, have some faith, okay?" "Yeah, okay." Naruto gave him a beautiful smile that was full of teeth and narrowed eyes. She retreated from him and threw aside his mask in the process. "And check this out," she said, pointing her fist at his foot, and a strand of webbing flew out of the rear. It stuck to his left foot, so she jerked it. He caught himself as she had anticipated, executing a complete backflip and landing on his feet again. What on earth? You're violating my copyright, he said, pointing an accusing finger. He was there. Yes. Now that they were both smiling, they said, go ahead and file suit, let's see how far you get. Wanna show me how to web swing? What should I teach? Simply leap and take off. He jumped out of the building, and Naruto did the same. She was in love at first swing. It was thrilling, not quite flying, but there was a challenge to this mode of transportation that made it enjoyable to try to go faster, higher, or lower. Every movement was planned in real time, and she could lose herself in the swinging more easily than she could when running in the morning. Peter was an adept, of course, and she tried to imitate his grace in the air. They navigated Queens, passed beneath the Queensboro Bridge, and entered the bustling center of Midtown. The buildings were enormous, and they were free to run wild. They yelled and whooped, jumping higher and faster, making abrupt dives, and pulling out at the last minute, all for the thrill of the wind rushing through their bodies and the adrenaline in their veins. Kurama loved to say aloud when he could, no, a coincidence of this magnitude that would be ridiculous, and we would be stupid to believe it. She assumed he liked the thought of having a body with more autonomy than their prior condition, as Jinchuriki permitted. They were currently stuck to the side of a skyscraper, next to a giant Stark Industries logo, near the very top of the building. Peter had left an hour earlier, but Naruto wasn't quite ready to call it a night. Naruto nodded in agreement at the symbiote fox head that she had come to associate with Kurama's new appearance. That was my first thought, too, not like it's easy to investigate a god or godlike being, there's really nowhere to start, not like there's any money to follow, and however our existence benefits whatever did this, it's not exactly obvious, we can assume the kind of thing that has this kind of power and reach, it won't be obvious how our actions help it. I can't help but feel that something is wrong with my genetic memory. My progenitor was corrupted in some way, but there is still an impression. This fear is visceral and raw. I know that we are not from this earth, and my progenitor knows that. Something or someone cast the die, possibly inflicting us upon this universe. The genealogy and memory are too tainted. I would assume that these factors corrupted my progenitor beyond recognition. Of our destroyer? I'm not sure. You believe we were led here by this terrifying creature? Could it demand that kind of power? Whether it was capable of doing so, I don't know, however, I'd hazard a guess that the reasoning is exactly the opposite, a being that inspires so much fear coupled with our history. I think it's fair to say that we would inevitably oppose such a force, and if that's true, we'd do well to search for our benefactor in godlike beings that sit on the opposite side of the scale. I'm inclined to assume, however, that such a being is not given to acting so overtly to oppose its enemies. Given these assumptions, I assume you can come up with a plan. The plan is not to have a plan, I guess, she said. We do what we do, wait for the bigger picture to reveal itself. In what she assumed was a shrug, Kurama bobbed his pseudo head up and down before retracting the head and tendril into the suit once more. Regardless of their current situation, there was no reason for further speculation because they had reached a dead end that could only be broken by the discovery of more evidence, so they would wait for more evidence to become available. She gathered herself to leave, standing horizontal against the skyscraper wall, when she noticed someone walking across the rooftop of the building next door. The building was a few stories shorter than the Stark building, and Naruto had the ideal vantage point to watch as a woman wearing a black bodysuit crossed the rooftop towards a rooftop access door of the Roxxon building. The building was identified by the signage as the Roxxon Energy Corporation building, a company with a bad reputation but enough money to thrive despite that reputation. Someone's up to no good. The woman was silent as the grave as she knelt in front of the door handle, working at the lock and idly humming a tune. Her hair was long and white, the bodysuit was shiny black leather with white tufts of what appeared to be fur at her calves and forearms, and she had a huge figure. Naruto jumped from the side of the building, made her way across the distance with ease, and leaned forward until she was right by the woman's ear. "What are you doing?" she questioned in her most inquisitive childish voice, which wasn't very convincing considering how gruff her voice sounded. Naruto was too powerful and heavy to be swept off her feet by what appeared to be a regular woman, even though she was in such good form. Despite her yell, the lady fell to her hands and attempted to sweep Naruto's legs from beneath her. Her legs struck Naruto's and she halted instantly. "And who do you think you are?" the woman asked, looking at Naruto with a critical gaze. Naruto responded, "I could ask you the same question," with a little head tilt. This action, along with the detached expression her mask gave her, was strangely disarming. "You can call me Black Cat," the woman said with ease, a smirk appearing on her lips. "Cat, you frequently break into office buildings. Surely it can't be very profitable." In an attempt to divert her attention, Naruto was half positive that Cat was manipulating the lock as her posture changed, leaning slightly forward and placing her hands behind her back. "We're just so curious, and you never know what a cat may get into. Come on, I told you my name. How about some reciprocity?" In that instant, Naruto realized she had never thought of an alias, which was easily fixed. The distinctive click of an open lock was heard by Naruto. "Well, since we're on fake name terms, I guess you can call me, 9, Naruto said. "Are you about done with that lock?" Black Cat managed to seem apologetic as she pulled the door open behind her, and Naruto gestured at the door. "Busted, would you put me in jail?" "Are you a terrorist or something?" shrugged Naruto. "What? No. Will you murder someone? Did you hurt anyone? Death? No, are you hurt?" As they continued to back and forth, a smile was spreading across Black Cat's face. "Well, depends on how much the CEO values his corporate secrets. Videos? Looped, protective measures. Disabled," she said with a sincere smile of self-satisfaction. Naruto gestured for her to continue, and Cat's eyes opened in amazement once more. "Well, lead the way, let's have a look at these secrets," she said. "Really? Do you hero types not care about justice or something? Do you have a hero complex? I'm just me, and Roxanne has a reputation for illegal dumping and doing just a ton of unsavory stuff. I figure it's not my job to protect the interests of giant evil corporations. As long as you're not physically hurting anyone, you're fine in my book." "Fair enough," Black Cat said as she turned to go through the door. "But," Black Cat replied, "you try to hurt anyone that doesn't deserve it, I'll be a lot less friendly." "Sure thing, we're all friends here," Black Cat said with a smile as she backed into the darkness beyond the doorway. Naruto thought that move was much more impressive when the other party couldn't see as well in the dark as she could. There were stairs beyond the doorway, and Naruto followed the cat down them. Her eyes were fixed on Black Cat's swaying hips for longer than she would have liked, but she was a teenager, regardless of mental age, and hormones were just something that teenagers had to cope with. She would have wanted to pretend that she was as vigilant as a hawk, keeping an eye on the thief's every move. One floor down, Naruto pulled her eyes away from the alluring scene and they emerged into a large hallway. To their left was an elevator bank, and to their right was a large desk that was likely used by an executive assistant during business hours. Behind the desk was a door with the words, D. Adjure, CEO, stenciled in gaudy golden letters. Kat immediately headed for it, Naruto following closely behind. The office was furnished in the stereotypically powerful businessman style, with a large desk that held a single monitor, a desk calendar, a Rolodex that Naruto assumed was merely for show, and a plush leather chair. The wall behind the desk had a huge window overlooking the avenue below, and the other walls were covered in framed pictures, all of which featured a man who was rather unimpressive. He was of average height and build, always wore a pricey tailored suit and blacked-out sunglasses, and his short black hair was perfectly styled in each photo, accompanied by an inauthentic smile. While Naruto looked out the window at the small cars and people going about their daily lives below, Kat immediately set her sights on the computer and began tapping the prosthetic claws at the ends of her gloves away at the keyboard. Naruto turned back when she heard the same claws making indentations in the wooden desk, and she glanced over Kat's shoulder at the images on screen. As Kat scrolled through the pictures, she saw that the people were all strapped to chairs, wearing prison jumpsuits, and receiving ominous liquids in unmarked bags intravenously. The people's reactions to their treatments varied. Some appeared healthier than ever as time went on, with their skin rippling with muscles and glowing with vitality, perfect images of healthy people, while the majority of them appeared to deteriorate. They lost weight, their skin turned an unhealthy sallow pallor, and the worst ones developed weeping sores on their skin. She looked at Kat and then back at the man labeled Walter Hardy in the pictures. That was the thing about domino masks, they were shit for actually hiding your features, and it wasn't difficult to make the connection, a relative, probably Black Kat's father, given their close resemblance. She didn't say anything and just watched as Kat printed the files and images, stuffed them into a manila envelope she dug out from inside the desk, and then she started to ruin the office. By the end of it, she ripped the framed pictures off the walls, cracked the window with the desk chair, and threw the computer and monitor across the room. She started to leave without saying anything. Naruto, wanting to show some solidarity, maybe, grabbed the bottom edge of the enormous desk with one hand, and it almost broke in her hands. The desk flipped with a sudden jerk upwards, spinning 3 times and landing upside down with a huge crash, scattering all of its contents across the office due to the spin. Kat remained silent, but Naruto felt her jaw had a certain satisfaction to it. They swiftly left the building and the office since Naruto was certain that eventually the commotion would draw a drowsy security guard. At last, they conversed once more on the rooftop. Was he killed? In reference to Walter Hardy, Naruto inquired. Black Cat tried to sound casual when he said, "I don't know who you're talking about," but he refused to look at her. Walter Hardy, that's none of your business, she growled, her shoulders stiff, and she had lost all of her sensual attractiveness. Fair, Naruto said as she followed her and rested her over her shoulder. I won't presume to tell you what to do, just know, if it's revenge you're after it's best to keep it simple, small, kill the guy if you have to, but leave it at that, if you don't it'll spiral, once you're in that spiral well, it's best not to dwell on it. Without responding, Black Cat ripped herself free from Naruto's hold and ran to the roof's edge, holding a manila envelope tightly. She then leaped and vanished. Naruto assumed she would know who had killed Ajir if she were to be found dead some time later. This one just seemed cartoonish, even though Naruto had previously battled a shark man and a rabbit goddess. A huge man in a high-tech Rhino suit was tearing through rush-hour traffic, a relatively small duffel bag full of cash strapped across his back, and as he muscled his way through a sea of cars, Spider-Man and Nine, the dynamic duo extraordinaire, chased after him, slowing down because they had to save civilians from their wrecked cars. Who is this guy, then? she called as she tore the door off of a minivan that had been parked next to a box truck, enabling its occupants to flee to a more secure location. Spider-Man cried out, "The Rhino," as he removed a Prius from what had once been a stunning muscle automobile. Clearly, 9 deadpanned. She threw the van door at the Rhino like a javelin, hitting him in the back and ripping the duffel's strap before it fell to the asphalt behind him. He barely noticed. He had a knack for it that Naruto couldn't even begin to match, or perhaps he was well practiced. She wasn't sure how much of his web weaving was due to his spider powers or his own creativity, but he saved civilians with a swift and steady hand while those who hadn't yet experienced the wrath of the Rhino fled their vehicles ahead of him. It was becoming annoying. The Rhino had started throwing vehicles, passengers and all, at his pursuers, and Spider-Man was able to catch them. "Okay, that's enough, you cover the people, I'll stop him," she called over her shoulder as she swung forward and upward. She positioned herself over the Rhino and, using one of Peter's tricks, shot 2 web lines slightly in front of and to either side of the raging criminal. The web stuck to the pavement, and Naruto yanked with all her strength, slingshotting herself downward. Her feet struck the Rhino's upper back, and the force of the blow knocked him forward onto his face and chest. His horn cracked the pavement, and his forward momentum caused him to slide, face first, for a few feet before stopping at the end of a 6-foot-long furrow his horn had carved. When she felt him stir beneath her feet, Naruto flipped away, landing a couple 100 feet in front of the Rhino as he stood up. Naruto had halted for a while, sitting on his back, thinking quite optimistically that she had ended the fight in one hit. "Another little spider for me," he added, sporting a snap of his knuckles. The villain roared in rage as he grabbed the mangled yellow mess that was once a cab and violently returned it to the sender. "Not a spider," Naruto interrupted him. She grabbed the closest empty vehicle, an empty yellow cab, and lifted it easily. It was awkward but not heavy. She saw his eyes widen as she threw it directly at his face like a shot putter. It impacted and the front end of the vehicle crushed and deformed against the Rhino's upper torso. Knowing that it wouldn't put him down, Naruto ducked over the cab, flipped horizontally, and threw a web at the flying object as it passed below her. As soon as she hit the pavement, she yanked on the web, stopping and reversing the cab's momentum, sending it sailing back over her own head and again at the Rhino. Knowing that it wouldn't put him down, she held out her right hand towards the projectile, firing a black spike of hardened symbiote from the palm of her hand. Kurama's powers were so versatile, that it punctured the cab's gas tank as it struck the Rhino for the second time. A bolt of lightning eagerly sprang from her hand with a thunderclap, igniting the gasoline and causing an explosion that blew out the windows of all nearby vehicles. The high-tech suit was tough, ridiculously so, and it seemed to insulate the Rhino from the worst of the electricity. Her punches had little effect against whatever material this suit was made of. Not dealing enough damage wasn't a problem she'd had in this life yet. She followed in the wake of the explosion, not wanting to give the Rhino a chance to regain his balance. She wreathed her hands with lightning as she struck the criminal with a series of punches on his abdomen. A smirk appeared on the Rhino's face, the only part not covered by the suit, as she backed off and thought about her options. She moved to the left well before his fists tore up the stretch of road she had been occupying. "Let me show you how it's done, little girl," he said, taking a few thundering strides forward while raising his hands over his head and interlacing his fingers. It seemed that he was as strong as he was stupid. She joked, "Gee, mister, thanks for showing me," as she got hold of his horn, which was near the ground after his attack. She used her hold to keep his head down and gain more leverage as she slammed her knee into his bare face, hearing his nose crunch as it broke and the Rhino rear back in agony while clutching at his bleeding face with his large hands. "You're a bitch," the words had a distinct tenor and taste, and he had shifted to his native Russian as he blubbered beyond his palms. She remarked condescendingly, "Don't worry, the bad lady will be gone soon enough," as clouds loomed overhead. She then hopped back, separating them by at least 30 feet. "I will murder you." In a reasonable imitation of a starting stance, he hunched over and placed his hands on the ground. "I'm sure you will," Naruto said condescendingly. "Now, please be quiet and let's see if we can't overcome that insulation." "What?" As the clouds darkened and thunder rumbled in the sky, Naruto held up a palm to the sky, causing red electricity to flare wildly. "Hey, I've always wanted to do this, humor me, okay?" Without waiting for his approval, she spoke again, lowering her voice an octave with false solemnity. "Vanish with the, she said, placing her other palm to her chin inquisitively. "Shit, what did he say?" As Rhino took off and attempted to close the distance, she interrupted herself and said, "Oh well, sorry, Sasuke, I'm stealing your jutsu, but I don't remember your line, it's been so long since I heard the story, eh." She brought her hand down before Rhino could cover even half of the distance between them. Before the charging Rhino was swallowed by a massive bolt of red lightning, which lingered for nearly a full second, lighting up the New York street like a second sun. When the glow faded, the Rhino was left in a crater, smoking, singed, and unconscious, but still alive. Some witnesses claimed to have seen the head of a red dragon in the clouds. After seemingly ensuring that all civilians were safe, Spider-Man arrived on the scene and doused Rhino with webbing while he was unconscious. By the time it was all over, she could only see his face. Holy shit. That was insane. The last time Rhino went on a rampage, it took me hours to bring him down. It was a big event, as you can probably understand, he cried. And quick. Naruto sighed and looked back at the street behind Rhino. It was completely destroyed, with cars scattered everywhere, some on fire and others hanging from webs. He had caused a great deal of damage in the half-mile he had driven from the scene of the first bank heist. I can imagine a lot of things. I no longer have to imagine what it looks like when you cover a giant Rhino man with your special goo. Cease. Just, no, he trembled, and Naruto laughed. Okay, but you know someone's going to make a porn parody. She was observing it once more. A week had passed, and Dario Ager had not made the news save for reports about Roxanne's stock continuing to increase steadily in value while he was keeping an eye on it. Some sources claimed that this kind of annual increase in value was suspicious in and of itself, but Naruto wasn't in the habit of looking into financial crimes, so she chose to observe the Roxanne building instead. Even though the woman had been emotional during their parting, Naruto had expected Kat to carry out her plan of retaliation right away. She didn't think the thief would allow her father's death to go unpunished, especially after witnessing the photographic proof of his suffering. The suffering of all those people, whether or not they were convicted felons, didn't deserve that, and if Black Cat didn't do anything about Ager, it would be up to Naruto to bring about some measure of justice for those people. She wasn't interested in killing a man who had never done anything to her personally, so justice at Naruto's hands would undoubtedly be more convoluted than she had anticipated. The best perch, of course, was inside the giant, in the Stark building signage. The counter space of the, created a nice little covered seat, free of any bird droppings and sheltered from the high-altitude gusts that were becoming uncomfortable as the season pressed into fall. So, there Naruto sat, tapping away at her phone, doing a little Facebook sleuthing between intermittent glances at the four armed guards, Adger had decided it was wise to hire more security after the break-in, who seemed to interpret the words guard duty as meaning an 8-hour smoke break. She didn't think they would be much of a deterrent to a truly motivated individual, but the fight that would undoubtedly break out if any such individual showed. Although it was clear that a thief would not engage in such a foolish behavior as keeping up a social media presence, she was aware that Black Cat had a family. Walter Hardy had passed away 2 years prior, but a quick search for his name had produced his obituary, which stated that he was survived by his wife, Lydia Hardy, and daughter. She was unable to provide a name, likely due to her age at the time. Then there was Facebook, where elderly people posted everything, including their names, addresses, and the names of their family members. Lydia Hardy's page was a treasure trove of information, and Naruto was willing to wager that Felicia Hardy was the Black Cat. Her mask was off, of course, because no one was going to see her on the side of a skyscraper, right? Her mask spread over her face again, but it was probably too late. She was smiling at her own inventiveness when she heard a dull roar that sounded like rockets in a space movie. She looked up from her phone and saw Iron Man in all his red and gold glory, hovering a foot or so away. "Are you plotting a break-in? You keep setting off my alarms, which are my employers." Attempting to pilfer Tony Stark's state-of-the-art, ultra-innovative, brilliant technology. Was this guy serious? Are you serious now? She questioned him as her phone vanished into whatever area Kurama had set aside for holding tiny items after sinking into the symbiote. What? My, employer's alarms, she jeered at him. Who do you think you're fooling, Mr. Stark? She asked, lowering her voice in a mockery of his and highlighting the sulky teenage act in an attempt to keep him on the defensive. The suit seemed to filter his speech, making it sound tinny and electronic, but he sounded like he was gritting his teeth. "I'm not very eloquent, I trip over my words a lot," he said. She assumed that he wasn't used to admitting any kind of personal flaw, even if he was lying about it. "It must be difficult to attend all those board meetings, isn't it?" She was simply swinging madly. As long as he didn't make an effort to identify her, he might or might not be Tony Stark. The most important question, in my opinion, is who you are and why you are on Mr. Stark's building. "I'm not Tony Stark." "Hold on, you're that woman with the electricity, 9. At his tired sigh, she laughed and said, "Sure am, Mr. Stark. Am I not quite as famous as you thought?" With a metallic clank, he palmed his face, or mask, and said, "Please, simply, what are you doing here? What are you looking for? You know who your neighbor is." Iron Man was not a subtle person, and the guards were all staring back at them as she gestured beyond him to the Roxxon headquarters. "Know what precisely?" "It's not exactly illegal to be a stereotypically sad person," said Dario Adger, CEO of Roxxon, a company that engages in shady business methods and poor tech. "I'm not overly familiar with the American legal system, but I'm almost certain that testing unproven and dangerous drugs on unwilling human subjects is pretty illegal." "You have evidence?" he inquired. If Felicia wanted to kill Adger, Naruto could understand that, but if they could enlist Iron Man, they might be able to achieve closure for more people than just Felicia Hardy. "Friend of mine does, we're working on it," or they would be when Naruto met Felicia. "Is that your friend Spider-Man?" he inquired, and Naruto merely shrugged. "Want to get in?" Naruto inquired. "Bring me some solid evidence, until then, stop loitering on Mr. Stark's building." "All right, Mr. Stark." As she leaped away, she chuckled. You know, you should stop referring to yourself in the third person. People will think you have a giant head. With a sigh, he began using facial recognition to scan her face. After following Felicia Hardy from lunch with her mother to an ESU dorm in Manhattan, possibly the black cat used stealing to pay for her education, and then to an art gallery downtown, Naruto caught up with the black cat the following night. She had been lucky, and following Lydia Hardy paid off quickly. Of course, the gallery was closed, and they were on the rooftop, with Kat in the middle of unlocking a panel in the skylight. Naruto said, "Hey, good lookin'," as she slipped up behind her. "What's cookin'?" Kat shot back, still tugging at the lock, her shoulders tensing for a minute. Before the burglar turned around with a tentative smile, Naruto heard the lock click. "We must cease meeting in this manner. What will the public think?" The new sidekick of Spider-Man meeting up with crooks under the moonlight. "If anything, he's my sidekick," sneered Naruto. "So, you've been keeping an eye on me?" People were always interested in new heroes, and Naruto was the newest kid on the block. She had only been at the costumed vigilante thing for a little more than a week, but she and Spider-Man had made enough waves on YouTube with a few videos of them punching and kicking various small-time criminals and the big finish on the Rhino for interested parties to take notice. "Oh, yes, I'm a very studious cat, and I knew you were a hero type." Naruto shrugged and said, "I'm just me, as I've already told you." "And does breaking into this art gallery bother just you?" As she opened the glass panel, Black Cat inquired. Naruto explained, "I'd rather you didn't, we could just talk, forgo the breaking and entering," as she extended her shoulders and inadvertently thrust out her chest. "You know the super suit is very flattering," Cat laughed. "I'm blushing, but that beauty as a weapon thing is my shtick, and I don't see what we've got to talk about, unless you're gonna help me carry out a few paintings. We could talk about Dario Agger." That made Kat's expression steely. "No, we can't," she said. "You know, I expected you to act quickly. You could have taken my advice, killed him, been done, moved on." With her eyes fixed on the rooftop, Kat said, "I'm working myself up to it." "Revenge isn't something you work up to, Felicia." The moment the name was spoken, Naruto flinched behind her mask, and Felicia's eyes shot up in surprise. It was clear from the fact that there was no information about her alias online that Felicia Hardy took care to conceal who she was. In fact, even as a costume thief with a somewhat flamboyant gimmick, she left no calling cards or other evidence that would have identified the Black Cat as the perpetrator of any of the numerous burglaries that occurred in New York in any given year. She was not on Naruto's radar, and might have stayed that way for years if not for their chance encounter on the Roxon structure. "Look, before you get all skittish." "Oh, I'm not skittish, I'm pissed off," Felicia said as she marched purposefully in Naruto's direction. Naruto saw the slap coming a mile away, but she did nothing to stop it. Her left cheek was smacked with flesh, and her hair was all over the place, but her head stayed motionless like a statue. "Ah! Jesus!" Felicia seemed unfazed by the pain, so she shook her hand as if to brush it off. "What gives you the right? It's embarrassing that you used my father as a TOTO." "I know," she cynically remarked, "well as long as you know, I guess it's all okay." She knows it was shitty. Even though she wasn't legally still a ninja, Naruto said, "I'm sorry," and she truly was sorry, but that was the essence of being a ninja, ferreting out secrets and using them. Old habits die hard. She continued to shake her hand and said, yeah, you're sorry so that makes it okay, I guess we're even," with more sarcasm. "Ah, what the hell are you made of?" she moaned and muttered pathetically. It was cute, and Naruto wanted to cheer her up. About her hand, and her identity being revealed, and anything else, Naruto would probably blame the hormones. This damn teenage body was so strong, and her biggest weakness was a pretty girl. Whatever the motivation, she pulled off her mask and showed her face. If it makes you feel better, my name is Naruto. There won't be anyone left in the city that doesn't know your face by the end of the year. You know I've always been a softie, Kurama. In response, Kurama merely gave the equivalent of a psychic sneer. For a brief moment, Felicia's jaw dropped and her eyes opened, but she immediately retrained her features into a facade of nonchalance and displeasure. All right, you're Naruto, and I'm Felicia. What do you want now that the truth is known? I need to appropriate culture, she said, turning to return to her ongoing thievery. Adger, how about Adger? Keep it small, kill him if you have to, she nearly yelled as she spun around. You mean what you said? If I'm not the Punisher, I apologize. I don't naturally do that kind of thing. I don't know what you were doing on that rooftop that night, but if you have a vendetta against Adger and you're looking for someone to do your dirty work for you, find someone else. Not that he doesn't deserve it, but I'm no killer, she said, her hair disheveled after her tirade. Her voice was low and she sounded almost defeated. You've got me all wrong, but do I? You told me to kill a man when we first met, and then you find me a week later because I didn't do it in time. It gives me a clear picture. Yeah, I can see how it would, Naruto said, placing her hands on her hips as she glanced down at her feet. But, believe it or not, my interest in Adger started the night I met you. Felicia sneered. I mean, I was aware of Roxanne and the slime that runs it, but that's just business, isn't it? Nowadays, it seems that the private sector views plundering as much as possible while avoiding the law as best practice. There isn't much that punchy athletic types like me can do about that. She raised her head once again to peek into Felicia's eyes. She walked up to Felicia and placed her hands on her shoulders, saying, but that, she gestured hazily with her hand, that shit that you uncovered, what he did to those people, your dad, well, we can do something about that, and, in my experience, revenge consumes people. I'm sorry if I assumed the worst of you, I truly am. I'm also glad that I was wrong, truly, because that means that despite this, she said, pointing to the open skylight panel behind the thief. Felicia mumbled, morals might be a little much, but her lips were starting to wrinkle. I don't think so, Naruto replied firmly, there's a line you won't cross. I have to respect that, because you wouldn't believe how many people would cross that line as though it weren't even there. She didn't know if it made a difference, but she had to hope that it did, because if it didn't, the reward of this new life, her parents, and her reunion with Kurama would all be wrong. Naruto had killed numerous times in her previous life, but never for something so ignoble as profit or retaliation. Felicia placed her hand on Naruto's shoulder and covered it. So, now that we've established that I'm a paragon of morality, that made them both laugh. How do we handle Adger? Felicia concluded. We use the evidence and we take him down and anyone that helped him, Naruto said plainly and straightforwardly. We'll get justice for your dad and all those people, he said. Oh. Only the two of us? I'm sure a couple pretty girls can wrangle up some helping hands. Felicia was now grinning really, but her eyes were watering. She moved closer to Naruto and gave her a strong hug, planting her words in the crook of Naruto's neck and shoulder. So we're actually going to acquire him? Believe it.